Welcome to the NancoVerse podcast. It's the 11th of February 2021, and I would like to start today's podcast by a post on Instagram by one of my friends. Her name is Shainal Kabir Verma. She's a poet. And she is amazing. She's really good. I would highly recommend all my listeners to go onto her profile on Instagram and find her. Her name is Shainal Kabir Verma. Her name is spelled as Shainal Kabir Verma. And the post goes like this. She writes a lot of poetry, but this post in particular is sort of a write up and it's so beautiful. And I would love to read this out. The title of this post is A Home That Is Your Heart. For so long, you've been searching to fill all voids inside you. Your finicky feet have traveled to infinite number of places. Yet it seems they can't seem to call a place home. It seems that you're beginning to lose faith in miracles. You're on the verge of becoming hopeless. Darling, it's on those very days. The only thing that'll save you is your own love, your own light, your own colors. Once you look within, you will find you have within you all the colors you keep searching for in this world. You have within you a galaxy. You're like stardust, only brighter. On days you feel the world is black and white, look within your heart full of love, carrying colonies full of rainbow-filled skies and stories, waiting to be explored by you. Once you explore your heart, you'll find how the walls of your heart are painted with experiences that stretch beyond just black and white memories. Your heart lies at the brim of an explosion, but it waits for you to trace its afterglow, reflecting equal losses to gains. Once you begin to see them as gifts of life, euphoria will take over your existence. You will find you've witnessed the most beautiful rainbow. It is the one you lavishly witness within you. A home that is your heart. That was a beautiful write-up by Shainal Kabir Verma. Do find it on Instagram. And now moving on to the news for the day. There has been an important development in the macroeconomic front in the nation. The Reserve Bank of India has decided not to hike policy rates for a 10th consecutive time. This has a lot of ramifications on the entire economic scenario of the nation, and our RBI governor Shaktikant Das has decided to stay in an accommodative stance, charting a course different from that adopted by most global central banks. The Monetary Policy Committee (MPC) of the Reserve Bank of India on Thursday left the key policy rates unchanged and retained its accommodative policy stance to support the uneven economic recovery in the wake of the COVID pandemic. The RBI kept the repo rate, which is the rate at which the RBI lends to banks. The RBI lends to banks, guys, and they do it at a very, very low interest rates. And if you really get into the understanding of the entire economy, it's so annoying. It's like, dude, they get so much money at such a low interest rate, but whatever, they need to do it so that the economy doesn't fail. Anyway, the RBI kept the repo rate, the rate at which the RBI lends to banks, unchanged for the 10th time in a row at 4%. So banks can draw money from the RBI at 4%, and that's called the repo rate. All 6 members of the MPC, headed by RBI Governor Shaktikant Das, voted to keep the repo rate intact, while another member, Jayant Verma, dissented against retaining the accommodative policy stance. The RBI decision indicates that lending and deposit rates are expected to remain unchanged in the banking system. What surprised most was the RBI retaining the reverse repo rate at 3.35%. The reverse repo rate is the rate at which RBI borrows from banks. A hike in this rate would have meant that the central bank wanted to absorb more money or liquidity and would have signaled the start of reversal of monetary policy cycle that would eventually lead to a rise in rates. Behind the RBI decision not to hike rates is also its outlook on inflation for the next financial year. Despite crude oil prices rising over $90 per barrel, it has projected a lower retail inflation level of 4.5% in the next fiscal 2022 to 23, as against the inflation forecast of 5.3% for 21-22. However, the Monetary Policy Committee has decided that growth needs to be supported. The MPC is of the view that continued policy support is warranted for a durable and broad-based recovery. Das said, Expressing optimism, Das said, as Lata Mangeshkar, whom we lost recently, sang in her immortal voice, "आज फिर जीने की तमन्ना है." Sir, she also said, "आज फिर मरने का इरादा है." I hope. Anyway, together with the spirit behind the next line of this beautiful song, she has conveyed an internal message of optimism. Das said the ability to forecast the course of the economy is so contingent on the evolution of the virus that one prognosis is as good or as bad as the other. Quote, "If the last 2 years of living with the virus have taught us anything, it is to remain humble, but grounded in self-belief, never losing confidence, optimism," he said. This all sounds really good. Globally, the central banks have been tightening the monetary policy to control inflation. In the US, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell signaled last week that the US Central Bank would begin steadily raising interest rates in mid-March. The Bank of England raised interest rates to 0.5%. In Brazil, the central bank recently increased its benchmark interest rate by 1.5 percentage points to 10.75% and signaled another increase in its next meeting. The European Central Bank kept its key interest rates unchanged, but it left the door open to an interest rate increase later this year. The RBI has projected real gross domestic product growth projection at 7.8% for 22-23. The real GDP growth at 9.2% for 21-22 takes it modestly above the level of GDP in 2019-2020, which is pre-pandemic. The policy panel said, but the projection is marginally below the lower limit of band of 8 to 8.5% in the economic survey of 21-22 and well below the IMF's forecast of 9%. The MPC noted that, quote, recovery in domestic economy activity is yet to be broad-based, as private consumption and contact-intensive services remain below pre-pandemic levels. The RBI has also extended the on-tap liquidity schemes to contact-intensive sectors, which will allow them to get access to credit at slightly lower rates. Quote, at the current time, we are still involved in mitigating the impact of the pandemic. Our underlying concern and objective is to put growth on a strong and self-sustaining path. Quote end. The RBI Deputy Governor Michael Patra said in a press conference after the unveiling of the policy. The MPC also seems to have got some cushion from inflation reading projections. The central bank has projected CPI inflation to peak in the current quarter. Consumer Price Index. CPI is Consumer Price Index, yes. Inflation to peak in the current quarter and then trend downwards. It expects retail inflation to average 4.5% in 2022-23 with quarter 1 22-23 at 4.9% and quarter 2 at 5%, with the implicit assumption that the monsoons would be normal. Quote, prospects of a good Rabi harvest add to the optimism on the food price front. The outlook for crude oil prices is rendered uncertain by geopolitical developments, even as supply conditions are expected to turn more favorable during 2022. While cost push pressures on core inflation may continue in the near term, the Reserve Bank survey points to some softening in the pace of increasing selling prices by the manufacturing and services firms going forward, reflecting subdued pass-through, the MPC resolution said. On higher government borrowings to finance the expanded capex plan, Das said, quote, while the RBI will continue to focus on smooth completion of government borrowing program, market participants also have a stake in the orderly evolution in financial conditions and the yield curve. It is expected that market participants will engage responsibly and contribute to cooperative outcomes that benefit all, he said. Yes, so the RBI has decided not to increase the interest rates and retain its accommodative policy, which can be quite a double-edged sword because the more money there is in circulation in the market, the higher chances there are of inflation. And I don't know how many of you have been facing the brunt of things becoming more expensive around you, but he is right when you say that it is time to stay humble, because when things get expensive, you have to, keep a tab on your expenses, bro. But hopefully, I hope they know what they're doing. Another really interesting piece of news coming from the Reserve Bank of India, where the RBI governor said cryptos have no underlying asset, not even a tulip. This is a report by Khushbu Narayan. It says, reiterating the central bank's serious concerns over cryptocurrencies, RBI, Reserve Bank of India Governor Shaktikanta Das, Thursday said, these are a big threat to the country's financial and macroeconomic stability, and also warned investors that cryptocurrencies do not have any underlying asset. Quote, as far as cryptocurrencies are concerned, the RBI stance is very clear. Private cryptocurrencies are a big threat to the financial and macroeconomic stability. They will undermine RBI's ability to deal with issues related to financial stability. I think it is my duty to tell investors that when they are investing in cryptocurrencies, they should keep in mind that they are investing at their own risk. They should keep in mind that these cryptocurrencies have no underlying asset, not even a tulip, said Das in a press conference following the policy rate decision. His comments come as yet another blow to the crypto industry, which have been reeling from the new tax imposed by Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in the budget. She had proposed a 30% tax on private cryptocurrencies and non-fungible tokens. Additionally, tax deducted at source (TDS) of 1% is to be levied on every digital asset transaction. Das declined to give a timeline for its introduction of the CBDC. We can't give a timeline on CBDC. But what I can say is that whatever we are doing it very carefully and cautiously. I think CBDC is the digital currency, central bank digital currency, yeah. Introduction of CBDC. But what I can say is that whatever we are doing it very carefully and cautiously. We have to keep risks like cybersecurity and counterfeiting in mind. So we are proceeding cautiously and can't give a timeline, Das said. The RBI governor also said that work on both wholesale and retail models of the central bank digital currency was ongoing. Which model is tested first will be decided later, he said. We are not working with any external agencies when it comes to the CBDC. We are working with the CBDCs in our own ecosystem. Any decision to engage with any other agencies will be taken later. We are open to trying all possible technologies for CBDC. It depends on the use case, so it won't be one or the other, he said. So cryptocurrencies don't look like a bright future in this country. It comes from the very top of the financial hierarchy, which is the RBI, and the director of RBI is actually cautioning investors to invest in cryptocurrencies, saying that it doesn't have any underlying asset. I would love to know your thoughts on this. What are your thoughts? If you feel, do you feel that cryptocurrencies are a safe bet for the future for your own money? Or do you think that cryptocurrencies are nothing but boo-boo for your money? Let me know in the comment section. Moving on to a health-related article written by Anona Dutt in the Indian Express, which talks of risk of heart disease high even a year after COVID. This is a study which has been done and it talks about how many have been affected in the second wave are facing heart issues, which is quite saddening, to be honest. So here it goes. It is not just heart attacks and strokes that doctors reported immediately after COVID infections. A study from the United States now shows that risk of heart conditions remains significantly high even a year after the infection. Similarly, Delhi doctors report that those infected during the second wave are coming back with inflammation of heart muscles, heart attacks, and irregular beating of the heart. The US study shows the risks were higher even in those who were not admitted to the hospital when they had COVID, and increased depending on the care setting from non-hospitalized to those who needed ICU care. Quote, our results provide evidence that the risk and one-year burden of cardiovascular disease in survivors of acute COVID are substantial. The study recently published in the journal Nature Medicine states. Said Dr. R.R. Kasliwal, chairman of Clinical and Preventative Cardiology Department at Medanta, the Medicity Hospital. Quote, We know that COVID 19 results in cytokine storm and affects the heart. We know COVID patients come in with various heart conditions, but we cannot say for sure who will develop these long COVID symptoms and when. It can be after 3 months, 6 months, or a year. We are seeing patients from the previous wave still coming to the hospital with heart conditions. It is too soon to say if Omicron will have similar effects. Of course, those who have comorbidities such as diabetes and hypertension, who are anyway at a higher risk of cardiovascular diseases, have a higher chance of developing heart conditions as COVID sequelae. I've never heard this before, COVID sequelae. But we have seen others also coming in with blockages, heart dysfunctions, and high pulse rate months after infection, he added. Dr. Vivud Pratap Singh, consultant of interventional cardiology at Fortis Escorts Heart Institute, said, quote, "In our OPD, we are frequently seeing patients from the surge in cases in April-May last year with post-COVID sequelae in the long haul." He said patients experience a host of complications such as myocarditis, inflammation of heart muscles, left ventricular dysfunction, a condition where the heart's left ventricle chamber is damaged, pericarditis, an inflammation of the sac covering the heart, and myocardial infarction, heart attack. Dr. Singh added, "Since COVID 19, we are seeing an increase in the number of patients with heart failure. We have more heart failure without any ischemic cause, any conditions that cuts off blood supply such as clots being stuck in the vessel. Usually failure is either caused by ischemia or weakening of heart muscles. Another study from Australia has also shown 15 times increase in myocarditis and pericarditis, inflammation of the heart muscles at the sac around the heart, 6 times increase in thromboemboloms." I cannot pronounce this. That's why doctors need to be paid. Thromboembolism. BOLISM. Thromboembolism, clot getting stuck in blood vessel, and 4 times in heart attacks. Doctors suggest that those who have recovered from COVID, even those with milder diseases, undergo a cardiac checkup every 6 months. I think this is very important and I should repeat this. Doctors suggest that those who have recovered from COVID, even those with milder disease, undergo a cardiac checkup around 6 months after the infection. At least till researchers can determine who is at risk of those long COVID symptoms. Quote, "There should be routine screening for cardiac ailments around 6 to 9 months after COVID infection. Most likely, new protocols will come up. Most have no symptoms, but there are some in whom heart muscles get affected, and even though there are no symptoms in the short term, it could result in inefficient pumping later on. There are some who develop electrical anomalies causing the heart to start beating fast. We have already reported heart attacks and strokes due to clots immediately after COVID infection," said Dr. Sandeep Budhiraja, Group Medical Doctor, Max Healthcare. He further said last year we showed in a study that long COVID symptoms were not related to severity of the disease. So there is no reason to believe that there will be no post-COVID symptoms with Omicron even though symptoms are milder. Dr. Kasliwal, who suggested that people with a history of COVID, especially those with comorbidities, should get an ECG if they have the infection recently or a stress ECG if they had the infections over 6 months ago. Quote, "If there are any abnormalities, it will be detected. We still ask patients who were hospitalized with the infection not to get back to their routine activities immediately, even if they feel okay, because we do not know what is going on inside." Damn. I really hope and pray for everybody who has gotten who has contracted the COVID-19, especially in the second wave or whichever wave. I really pray and hope that everybody gets back to being healthy. And please listen to your doctor. Please listen to the family members around you. Take care of yourself. Hydrate yourself. And take care of your heart, because you'll only be alive and happy as long as your heart is alive and happy. And before I move on to the next piece of news, I would want to put this as a public disclaimer to everybody who is listening from the state of Uttar Pradesh. Guys, there's an election in your state, so I would highly recommend that you go out and cast your vote, and also tell your friends and family members to do the same, so that we are able to, make sure that we get good people to rule us, politically speaking, you know. And make sure that you do a little bit of research about who are you voting for. I've always had this position when it comes to voting, that it is not important which party you vote for, but it is important which candidate you vote for, because it is important that we have good, ethical, and honest people as that we can call politicians, who go and represent us from our constituencies. So make sure that you do a little bit of research about who the candidate is from your constituency, what kind of a background do they have, what kind of a criminal background do they have, and how much have. If education is something that you think is important, then make sure that you vote for an educated person. If you feel that the person should be moral, like if they have done things in the past for the society and things like that. Sometimes education is not the most important thing. You could have a person who is not a PhD or a master degree holder, but is still quite competent to be a politician. So, all of my friends from Uttar Pradesh, make sure that you go out and cast your vote whenever it is your turn, and make sure that you elect somebody who is a good politician. And now, moving on to an editorial by Dharamkriti Joshi, which is back to the inflation and RBI's decision to not increase the monetary policy interest rate. I really am getting back to this news item because I feel it is quite interesting and important for all my listeners and for myself to understand what this is all about. Macroeconomics has a very, very big impact on our daily lives, and I would like to read more on this. So here it goes. The headline says, "In pursuit of growth, RBI stays the course despite risk to inflation. Changing global environment." RBI stays the course despite risk to inflation and changing global environment. The underlying framework of the union budget, though less inflationary, has a consumption-led budget would have been remained growth-focused. Okay, I don't even know what I just read. The underlying framework of the union budget, though less inflationary than a consumption-led budget, would have been remained growth-focused. That could have nudged the RBI to announce a formal policy normalization path. Moreover, since the last monetary policy review, the risks stemming from the Omicron variant have proved to be milder relative to the Delta version. But these concerns have been replaced by new risks emanating from elevated crude oil prices and the possibility of aggressive policy measures by the US Federal Reserve. Yet, Mint Road has chosen to stay accommodative. Clearly, growth is the greater concern. The status quo has positively surprised markets, who had penciled in a reverse repo rate hike. The benchmark 10-year yield, which had started to ascend a few months back and got a further lift from the sharp rise in the government's borrowing program for the next fiscal year, softened a bit. That said, even with an accommodative stance, the RBI continues normalizing liquidity in a calibrated manner by layering a dynamic approach and restoring the liquidity management framework of February 2020. The global situation, however, is different. With inflation surprising on the upside and being viewed as a potent threat, many central banks are tilting towards faster tightening. Several emerging market economies, especially those following inflation targeting, had started raising interest rates last year in response to inflationary pressures from food and energy prices. With geopolitical tensions in Central Asia and Ukraine escalating, the spike in energy prices is fomenting inflation even as global growth slows. Global growth. Currently, China is the only major economy cutting rates to stem sharply slowing domestic demand. Many Southeast Asian central banks are staying accommodative since their inflation remains largely benign, and some, like the Bank of Thailand, remain tolerant to inflationary pressures. Among the systematically important ones, the Bank of England was the first to raise rates. Europe, too, is facing higher than anticipated inflation, and the European Central Bank, which so far kept its options open, is now expected to advance normalization. Actions of the US Fed matter most to India. Faced with rising inflation, which touched a multi-year high of 7% in December, the Fed made a U-turn on its inflation is transitory stance. It now sees insistent pressures and has telegraphed a hawkish stance. S&P Global believes the Fed can hike interest rates as much as 6 times in 2022 starting March. Although India's monetary policy is primarily governed by domestic factors, we cannot completely ignore the Fed's actions. Since abrupt policy changes create volatility in capital flows and currency markets, as was witnessed during the taper tantrum of August 2013. Taper tantrums of August 2013, very interesting. While India's external accounts are healthy, higher foreign exchange reserves and lower current account deficits and short-term foreign debt, its vulnerability arises from high domestic debt and deficit. Going by its evolving communication, the shock from Fed actions is said to be bigger than before. For now, the RBI derives comfort from the rupee remaining resilient despite tightening global financial conditions. Rising crude oil prices and current account deficits can increase India's vulnerability though. The RBI has so far remained tolerant to inflation, staying decisively above its preferred 4% mark, the midpoint of 2 to 6% that it targets. This was needed to support the economy hit hard by the pandemic and the fragility of recovery since then. Despite the swift progress in vaccinations, a mild third wave, and a growth-supportive fiscal policy, attention remains focused on growth as the RBI sees inflation coming down to 4.5% next fiscal year. It has projected the economy to grow at 7.8% next year, which incidentally is CRISIL's forecast as well. We assume that COVID-19 will gradually weaken and contact-based services, which bore the brunt of successive waves of the pandemic and are currently growing 8 to 9% below their pre-pandemic levels, will stage a bounce back and script a broad-based recovery. I hope the same. I hope these services do come back. With so many moving parts, assessing and forecasting inflation is an arduous and risky business. Plus, gauging the slack in the economy, referred to as output gap, has become harder with the pandemic-induced changes. This complicates the assessments of inflation. We expect retail inflation at 5.2% in the coming fiscal year. High and rising crude oil prices remain an inflation threat. We expect crude oil to remain in the band of $80 to $85 per barrel in 2022, up 17% from 2021. This scenario will not only increase pump prices, but can also have a cascading effect on other prices. Fiscal policy, which is tax cuts, is perhaps the best way to deal with the pressures from commodity prices. But given the already stretched fiscal consolidation path, a further cut in excise duty on oil was not envisaged in the budget. The government has to make money, let's be honest. They spend so much and they don't make much. The World Bank expects non-energy prices to fall 3% in 2022. Despite that, non-energy commodity prices will still be 28% above 2019 levels, and the pressure to pass on the costs to end consumers will persist. Damn. Companies were unable to fully pass on the soaring input costs, particularly those of key metals and energy in 2021. The broad-based recovery expected in the next fiscal will facilitate the pass-through of input costs to end consumers and keep core inflation high. It is notable that while overall consumer inflation came down to 5.2% in April-December 2021 from 6.6% during the same period in the preceding year, core inflation, which excludes energy and food, went up 5.9% from 5.4%. Core inflation, which excludes energy and food, went up 5.9% from 5.4%. This fiscal, in contrast to global trends, low domestic food inflation has dragged the overall inflation down. This trend could continue if monsoons are normal this year. After 6 consecutive near normal monsoons, the chances of a monsoon failure increase statistically speaking. Due to heightened uncertainty, the monetary policy will largely remain data-driven. The RBI will have to keep its eyes peeled for price trends, which have so far surprised on the upside in many economies. Damn. Inflation affects all of us. It really, really does. And so many factors are there in the world: crude prices, metal prices, supply chain issues, all of these things, geopolitical issues have such a big bearing. And I hope and pray that that prices don't go soaring through the roof, because people are really, really suffering. I can see it on the streets. As a journalist, sometimes I go out and I talk to people, and you can see it in their eyes, you can see it in their, hear it in their words, that especially people from the services sector. I met a man yesterday from the tour and tourism industry, and he used to give tours and help people with their travels and stuff. And he was an older man. He must have been in his mid 30s or in his 40s or something, and he was just livid by the unemployment that he's been facing for so many years now due to the pandemic, and it's not getting any better for him. So I really, really hope that we move towards progress, and we move towards strengthening our economy, so that these inflationary pressures don't really have that much of an effect on us. Moving on, there has been an update in the Delhi University reopening news story, and there's good news on the front that Delhi University is now open for students to come back and enjoy their college life. Congratulations, guys. The pandemic batch is finally back. Woohoo! Man, I really, really hope and pray that people, whoever is going back to college, remain safe and they don't contract the COVID or spread it. But I think it's time to move on from these things and give kids their normal college life back. Indian college and university students, thankfully, protest many things, from the seemingly quotidian affairs of hostel fees and bad mess food to the loftier ideals of the perceived excesses of governments and even the injustices of the world order. Yet the protest at Delhi University earlier this week, conducted by both and left right wing student groups. Yes, this was actually quite a peculiar nature of this protest, because it brought the left and the right together. Because if there is no college, then there is no left or right in college. So it was actually quite heartening to see that left and right student groups coming together to protest. Was seemingly out of character, 100%. The livid learners demanded a return to the classroom, in essence, more studying and less structure. More studying and structure, not less. In the last 2 years, thousands of freshers have become seniors without ever attending classes. Yeah, thousands of freshers have become seniors without ever attending classes. Damn, that is so true. More importantly, though, they have never had a taste of campus life at DU. Man. University, where young adults take the first steps into a wider world, was reduced to a room at home and faces on a screen. For all the talk of the, quote, new normal and companies who profit from digital education selling it as a welcome development, home is no place for higher education. That's so true. That's the point I was trying to drive home when I was talking about this last time. University is always a heady experience, and most of it is outside the classrooms. At a time when people yearn to get away from the inherited domesticity of their parents' homes, the pandemic batches were trapped with their families. On Wednesday, it was announced that for the first time since the sudden lockdown in March 2020, DU is set to open for offline classes for bachelor's and master's students. Friends from diverse groups, a little learning and a little rebellion, and the freedom to make mistakes. It can take a while for new students to find themselves in a university. For those who have lost a majority of the time earmarked for that experience to the pandemic, that's a lot to fit in the time left. But a year on the campus is better than none. So true. I really hope you guys enjoy your time at the campus, man. Keep it clean, keep it happy, and make new friends. No, the protesting students, despite their ideological differences, weren't demanding classrooms and discipline. What they wanted was that brief and beautiful interlude when one is an adult, but not weighed down by the responsibility of work and family. From February 17, they shall have it. They shall have it, and I am so happy. I am so happy that these kids protested and people talked about it, and now we have from February 17th, DU reopening. Students are going to come from across the country and study in the beautiful campus, and I hope and pray that they're all safe and they learn and they have a good time in college, because that's what college is all about. College is about making friends, it's about meeting new people and having new experiences. Without that, there is no point in college life, to be honest. I mean, you can learn a lot theoretically from whatever studies that you're doing, whatever subjects that you chose for yourself. But if you were not in the campus and you did not meet other people and did not experience what it's like to sit in the canteen till 8 in the night, or like, say, just discuss politics and discuss what's happening in the world, or just talk to your friends, talk about anything. You don't have to talk about serious stuff. Just talk about how you weren't able to wake up today, or like what kind of clothes are you going to wear tomorrow, all that kind of stuff, man. Just that benign but sometimes heavy, all of these discussions where you were just like lost in being an adult but not weighed down by all of the realities of life, which is to make money and find a job and all of that stuff. But college is meant to be experienced, college is meant to be enjoyed, and I'm so happy that DU is opening again. And I want to congratulate all the kids who are gonna have to come to college now. So come to college and yeah, be cool. Now, moving on to news of immense geopolitical international importance, which is the Ukraine, Russia, United States, NATO story, which is fast developing into what could possibly a World War III, let's be honest. So, the United Kingdom has stepped into the mix and has put 1,000 more troops to support NATO allies. Yeah, the diplomats of the United States and Russia have met in Moscow and they're having bilateral discussions. But Boris Johnson says that the most perilous moment of the crisis is fast approaching. This is probably the most dangerous moment, I would say, in the course of the next few days, in what is the biggest security crisis that Europe has faced for decades. Johnson said at a news conference after meeting at NATO headquarters in Brussels. The British government said that on Thursday that it had put 1,000 more troops in a state of readiness to support NATO allies in the event of a humanitarian crisis caused by any Russian aggression. Officials also said that they were finalizing a package of potential economic sanctions against Russia if it attacks Ukraine, in a bid to pressure President Vladimir V. Putin to defuse the crisis caused by Moscow's buildup of what the United States says is 130,000 troops, many of them combat ready, near Ukraine's borders. 130,000 troops that are battle ready, damn. Britain has stuck a relatively hard line against Russia in the crisis, one that was echoed during talks in Moscow on Thursday between the country's foreign secretary, Liz Truss, and Russia's foreign minister, Sergei V. Lavrov, which ended with no apparent progress. Liz Truss again warned Russia that attacking its neighbor would, quote, have massive consequences and carry severe costs, urging Moscow to abide by its international agreements that commit to it respecting Ukraine's independence and sovereignty. Seated across a table from Truss, Lavrov set a stern tone for the talks, emphasizing that Moscow won't accept Western lecturing. Quote, ideological approaches, ultimatums, and moralizing is a road to nowhere, Lavrov said, noting that his talks with Truss marked the first meeting of the two countries, top to top diplomats in more than 4 years. Russia-UK ties have been badly strained by the March 2018 poisoning of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal in England and other sources of tension. During an exchange of icy comments after the British and Russian ministers' talks, Truss reaffirmed a strong call for Moscow to pull its troops back to their bases. Lavrov rejected the demand as inappropriate and pointed at British and NATO troops buildups in Eastern Europe. Quote, the demands to remove the Russian troops from the Russian territory cause regret, Lavrov said. Quote, we don't want to threaten anyone. It's us who are facing threats. Johnson rejected suggestions that there were tensions among European allies over Ukraine and praised the approach of the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who planned to visit Russia and Ukraine next week. Appearing alongside Johnson, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg also insisted that the alliance was united and added that while it was, quote, prepared to listen to Russia's concern, it would not compromise on core principles. Stoltenberg warned that Russian aggression could result in an increased deployment of NATO battle groups in the southeastern part of the alliance. Quote, renewed Russian aggression will lead to more NATO presence, not less. Moving on to more international news. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken um, has has said that the 21st century, will be shaped by Indo-Pacific region. The United States remains focused long-term on Indo-Pacific region despite concerns over Russian aggression towards Ukraine. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Thursday. Blinken is in the Australian city of Melbourne for a meeting on Friday with his counterparts from Australia, India, and Japan. The four nations form the so-called Quad, a bloc of Indo-Pacific democracies that was created to counter China's regional influence. The Quad, man, India is part of the Quad. It's not really a military alliance, but it's a bloc of Indo-Pacific democracies. There are a few other things going on in the world right now. Some of you may have noticed we have a bit of challenge with Ukraine and Russian aggression. We're working 24/7 on that, Blinken said in his first public address since arriving in Australia on Wednesday. But we know, the president knows, and each of you knows that this is better than anyone else, that so much of this century is going to be shaped by what happens here in the Indo-Pacific region. The Indo-Pacific is the fastest growing region in the world, accounting for two-thirds of global economic growth over the past 5 years and home to half the world's population. What matters in the region matters around the world, and challenges like climate change and COVID 19 can't be tackled by any nation alone. Quote, more than ever before, we need partnerships. We need alliances. We need coalitions of countries willing to put their efforts, their resources, their minds into tackling these problems. What really drives us is a shared vision. Free and open society, he added. Interesting. Quad. Let's see how much of a future that this coalition have. And while we talk about the influence of China, China is planning more than 50 space launches this year. These guys are really, they don't mess around, man. China is focused so much on becoming the next hegemonic power in this world. It's already the second biggest economy in the world, right after United States, and it's growing at a much faster pace. And now it's planning to launch another 50 space launches this year. China is planning to launch more than 50 space launches and 6 manned flights to complete the building of its space station. It's building its own space station, damn son. As it unveiled an ambitious plan on Thursday for its burgeoning space industry this year. The China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation said China will carry out over 50 space launches in 2022, sending over 140 spacecraft into space. 140 spacecraft into space, damn. Quote, the year 2022 will see China's projects in space at the top of its game. Ma Tao, the deputy chief of the Space Department at CASC, has been quoted by the official media. Among several tasks planned for 2022, Ma noted that 6 launches will be dedicated to China's manned space project to build a space station, which is expected to be completed this year. Quote, we will complete the rendezvous and docking of the 2 LAD modules, with the core module under manned condition to complete T-shaped design for the space station, said Bai Linhu, the deputy chief designer of Space Station System at CASC, state-run CGTN, reported. Last month, CASC said China will complete the building of the space station this year. Once ready, China will be the only country to own a space station of its own. The International Space Station of Russia, which is currently operational, is a collaborative project of several countries. China is set to become the country with its own space station. What is to be made of that is something that I would leave for all of you to think. But it's quite interesting how China doesn't really care about what's happening in the world, to be honest, in a way that it doesn't spend its time or resources trying to understand or trying to resolve problems with the nations. It only focuses on its development. It focuses on doing its space missions and doing its winter games and manufacturing for the world. China is really the powerhouse to look out for. We're all busy in Ukraine and Russia and all of these conflicts, but we kind of have taken our eyes off of the Chinese dragon, which is kind of taking over the world. And India as a country, I feel, needs to keep its eye open and make sure that we do not get our eyes off the bat and try to at least, if not take over Chinese economic powers, but at least try and be self-sufficient and also engage with the world. Being self-sufficient is important, but it is also important to have a say in the world, and China definitely does. So it's going to be very interesting to see the future of this world, especially with China taking the lead role in the spacecraft, in the space launches, and also having its own international space station, which is insane. And with this, I would like to end this podcast, this episode of the NancoVerse podcast. It's always a pleasure to bring you guys the news. And do consider hitting the subscribe button on YouTube. And thank you for all the new listeners that have been coming in. I see all of you, and keep liking, keep commenting, and also find the podcast on Spotify if you want to listen to only the audio version without having to put the video there, because a lot of times on YouTube, if you lock your phone, then the audio stops. So Spotify is there to solve that. So if you want to listen to the news on the go, to consider listening to the NancoVerse podcast on Spotify. And I hope everybody has a great life ahead. Go give people around you a nice tight hug. Love yourself, pamper yourself. Valentine's Day is around the corner. And I just want to say this to the people who are single. Yes, this is my message to the single people, not to the ones who have a partner, because you guys know what to do. Just give respect to them, give them love. But the people who are single, it's okay. Relax. Just relax. Go outside or not. Give yourself a gift. Pamper yourself. And take care of yourself. You don't have to be in a relationship to feel good about yourself. That's the most important thing. Taking care of our mental health is not dependent on our status of being single or committed. So if you're a young person listening to this and you're single on Valentine's Day, trust me, it's actually better, because you don't end up spending so much money. Invest that money, dude. Put it in mutual funds or something. Not in cryptocurrencies if you're in India, because there's a 30% tax slab. And I would like to end this podcast now. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. I love you all. Jai Hind.